Now we're going to talk about an allied issue, which is fear. Because I'm imagining that many people listening to these podcasts, or this particular podcast that we're talking about now, are going, yeah, 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 this is all very well. But what you're not talking about is how bloody petrified I feel when I am standing in front of the person who is abusive, particularly if they're in your intimate circle. I know this is mega. This is really, really, really tough stuff to address. I've experienced it in my own life considerably that when we're dealing with our intimate circle, it is so, so hard to operate as one's best self. Really, really difficult. If it's some stranger, then actually it's not so difficult. But with our loved ones, my goodness, it can be tough. Now, I think that there is a tendency for all of us to get a little confused about this. And let's see if we can slice up some of these ideas and if I can help you in some small way to make distinctions between uh, what is fear and what is something else. We often think that fear is the greatest obstacle in our life, that it is the greatest enemy. And there's a lot of, sort of trite fortune cookie stuff around where we say, fear is our greatest enemy and fear is the only obstacle. And some people might say fear of fear is the greatest obstacle. And it's a very persuasive thesis. And it seems to make a lot of sense. I happen to believe it is wrong. I don't think it is the greatest the obstacle. What we have, if we look at those last few exercises that we just did, when we're looking at our heroes, should be some evidence to help us understand the error of this judgment. Surely, but surely, we as a species are hardwired to be fearful. The reason why we are alive is because our great 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 grandmothers and grandfathers were instinctively fearful. They were worried about stuff. They made sure that they did not, if they could at all help it, put themselves into peril so that they got eaten by a saber-toothed tiger or fell under a truck or whatever it is. They survived. We are the inheritors of a very good survival instinct. And surely, and again, you've got to check out your science on this, it's not very complicated. The amygdala, the sort of limbic system of our brain, the oldest bit of our brain, has a fight and flight response. All of our hormonal systems, including the use of cortisone and adrenaline and a whole bunch of other drugs that we pump into our brains and muscles, is to get the hell out of there when we're under threat or to freeze. If you've got a great big bear coming towards you, no point in running. The damn thing's going to run faster than you. So what do? You stay very, very still. You play dead or whatever. Now, this is our makeup. It's the oldest bit of who we are. We are hardwired and made to be fearful, and then there are a whole lot of things that kick in straight away. Fear, flight, and then there's a couple other things that can happen when we have cortisone and adrenaline pumping around our system. When it comes to social interaction, these same responses will occur. That's our sort of knee-jerk reaction to threat. The good news is that we can override those responses. And Maxwell Maltz, in his book, The New Psychocybernetics, was fascinating about this. He talked about the way in which we have mechanisms in our brains which are goal-orientated. And he's got a lot more evidence at his fingertips than I have. But what he is saying is we're a little bit like a missile. We have a system, a little sort of mechanical system in us that plugs in a latitude and a longitude, and then unconsciously we will go to that place. What he talks about is self-image as being that homing mechanism. That's the thing that drives us. All of our behavior is theme-orientated. It's belief-orientated. If we believe ourselves to be shameful in some way, to be less than what we really should be, what do you know? Many of our instinctive responses are homing in on a failure mechanism or a victim mechanism. So I would argue that fear is neither your enemy nor the obstacle to change. Shame is. But let's talk about what shame is. I touched on it in a previous podcast, but if you're listening to the podcast that we've just done on heroic qualities, this is a little twin podcast to it, because if you can grasp this notion, I believe that we're very much on the right path to being and behaving as our best selves. Shame is this: it is a belief that we are inherently less than what we should be. So guilt is a different thing. Guilt is an emotional experience that we have when we've done something or said something which we know is wrong when balanced against our own belief system. And that is really, really painful. So I would invite you now, just for a second, to think of a moment in your life where you feel profoundly guilty. And just to remember quite how awful that emotion is. So if you've cheated on someone, if you've nicked some money out of your granny's purse to go and buy some sweeties or whatever, and you were caught and you were told off, that is a horrible feeling. It is nothing but nothing compared to the pain of shame. Shame is so painful that we bury it. It is of such magnitude of trauma that we do not address it. We push it right into the furthest corner of our unconscious mind, because if we were to look at it square in the face, we would just, I don't know, spontaneously combust. It's that hot. And so we are, I would argue, and most, I think, good psychologists these days would probably echo this, that we do everything in our power to protect ourselves from looking at these issues square in the face. The problem is, if that we continue to do that, we're not alive. We're just existing. And we're existing as a pale version of our authentic self. Excuse me, my mouth has gone to sleep. So if we begin to do some of these exercises, the rationale behind doing them is that we are actually talking to our unconscious. It's a really good trick. We're doing it because we're doing it in private. There's no witnesses. We never show this writing to anybody. It's one of those unusual opportunities to have a conversation with our own unconscious mind. Stuff comes up through these writing exercises that could otherwise be buried for very many years. And I would argue that most of the time it's safe. There are a couple of if you have been sexually abused, if you have been physically abused in a sustained way as a young person, this is heavy duty. And you have to be obviously careful in the way in which you readdress and revisit some of those experiences. In a separate podcast, I will probably talk about this and how we can handle it. And certainly, if you're going to read some of the writing that I've done, the books I'm writing, and so on, we will touch on this. Generally speaking, we have a thing that you might call a flip-out rule. If you just don't go to some of these places if it's too painful. I profoundly believe that actually you can still use these exercises even if you've been and experienced those enormous traumas, physical and emotional, spiritual traumas. I still think you can employ these techniques, but you have to be pretty damn careful. Most of the time we're looking at exercises which will address things that are not as extreme as that, but are still actually defining your sense of self, and we're trying to unpick the narrative or reframe the narrative that you are unwittingly carrying as your core sense of self, so that you can move from, if you like, your conditioned self, what we call your conditioned self, it's not really true, to your authentic self. Okay? I hope this is helpful. Bye-bye.